I'm still shaking. And it's been a couple of hours. I don't know if I'll ever stop shaking. Alright, the reason I'm here is because I have to tell someone. I have to tell someone because I'm going crazy if I don't tell someone. I'll change the names to protect identities, mine included, and I will not reveal the location this place took, as no human should ever have to endure what just happened. As with all stories, I'll start at the beginning. My two best friends, Will and Kim, and I love to hike. And when I say love to hike, I mean we geocache our brains out. When people are talking about TV shows, we're looking up the most obscure trails to try out next weekend. We've been to most national parks and quite a few state parks. Together, the three of us have worn through dozens of hiking boots, backpacks, water jugs, and flashlights. We fucking love nature. This past Monday, Kim called me up. I could tell exactly who it was and exactly why it was about hiking because she gets this twinge in her voice when she gets really excited about trails. "Jake," she shouted. "Where are we off to next week, Captain?" I asked. She's our super sleuth trail tracker. This one finds the best trails around. Somewhere close. A phenomenal hike. She was totally giddy. "Spill it, Chief. Where are we off to?" "The council. It's like 15 minutes outside of town." So excited. "You bought those new boots, right? My tip said that we'll need them." Tip. "Whoa, you talked to a person? Don't you normally pick up from one of your Twitter friends?" I couldn't even recall Kim ever talking to a person about a hike before, at least not in person. "Yeah, at the shop. I was picking out some thicker socks and some random guy just started asking questions about if I liked hiking, and after a few minutes he recommended this awesome hike. It sounds too good to be true, like, we've got to check it out." Kim, wait, some random guy told you about his hike? "Gotta call Will, I'll see you Saturday. Oh, one thing, he says that you have to go at night." I sat back in my chair, trying to process the conversation. "Night hike, huh?" "We did night hikes before. Lord knows we have the gear to do it, I just never liked them. It always creeped me out. Will and Kim, they lived for the thrill of nature and what secrets it held. Hiking at night was just turning up the dial to 11. Normally after talking to Kim, my mind was shot for the rest of the day, totally consumed by the upcoming hike. Not this time. For the first time in my life, I felt a kind of dread. It was just some old guy trying to be friendly. Hikers are friendly folk, I'm sure it's amusing. Of course it is, I said to myself. And I said it to myself every day this past week, trying to convince myself. It worked. For the most part. Today finally came. At 7:30 p.m. we arrived at the location. It was a small parking lot that could hold about 8 cars comfortably. The only light came from the interstate, a good distance from our lonely trail ahead. We got our gear together and suited up. Kim was practically doing cartwheels. She was psyched. "Are you guys ready? It's nearly dark out and we've got some ground to cover. It's only about 2 miles up, no loop, a spectacular view at the top." Will clicked his headlamp into place. I'm so ready for this. I could run straight up this trail. I packed my trusted Maglite flashlight into my bag. It's something I always do. Every trip, regardless of how many extra lights we had, I always packed mags. He had gotten me out of some tricky situations before. Maybe it was that feeling from Monday's conversation, but I couldn't fully shake that dread. Mags helped to assuage that fear enough to mask it from my friend. "Alright, let's go." Kim charged ahead, and we took off after her. The terrain was fairly rocky. We live in a semi-mountainous area, so rocks are common, but these hikes are a bit trickier at night. You really have to watch your footing more than normal. Add to the situation the growing dark, and you have a recipe for sensory claustrophobia. It's a really weird sensation knowing that space around you is enormous, but because of your limited vision and focus, you feel almost squashed. We had been hiking for about 20 minutes when our conversation lulled to a pause. Will broke the silence. "Do you guys realize that it's completely quiet out here?" "Well, it is night. Critters go to bed too," Kim joked. "No, I mean, there was a breeze when we first started. There's nothing now. Listen. If there was a person breathing in the tree line, we would have heard them. It was the stillest fog of blackness I've ever felt." Another pause, and Kim's loud comment practically made me jump. "It's fine, guys. Maybe there just aren't any creatures here. I bet we'll feel a breeze when we climb up a bit further." Her feet began to shuffle, then Will's as they continued to trot up the trail. I reluctantly followed. Now at 45 minutes in, the trail began to narrow. The rocky path was difficult enough, but now the trail was only about 2.5 feet wide at most. I paused for a moment and, despite my better judgment, looked to the right, away from the wall embankment to my left. All I could see was an utter maw of dark. Even with my LED headlamp shining into the darkness, it was as if I was hiking next to a black hole. All the light seemed to just disappear into the inky darkness beside and below me. I knew there were trees there, but the ravine seemed to stretch down forever. It was then I can recall feeling this pull into the dark void, like something wanted me to fall over and tumble over boulders, trees, bushes, and who knows what else. I snapped out of it and tried to catch up with my friends and their faint footsteps just up ahead. I'll never forget what happened next. I had just caught up with Will when I heard it. The sound was so loud that both of us let out a brief yelp, grabbing at each other instinctively. What the hell was that? Will stuttered. A critter. My false bravado was showing. Seriously, Jake, what the fuck makes that kind of noise? It sounded like a wolf or a dog, but just wrong. We shook it. Our territory has wild dogs that run in packs. It's nothing. Just an animal, and it sounded a good distance away. Keep moving, Jake. Keep moving. As safely as possible, the two of us caught up to Kim. Did you hear that noise? What noise? Kim genuinely asked. Are you kidding me? Will's voice dripped with indignation. We're in a silent black forest on a mountain, and you didn't hear Cerberus howl over there? I didn't know what a mythological dog sounds like, William, but I didn't hear anything. Kim, I heard it too. He's not making it up. I tried my best not to sound like a scared boy, but I couldn't help it. Have you ever heard something that rattled you? I mean, truly made you want to curl up in a ball at the very sound of it? That's fairly close to how I felt. Guys, don't take offense, but stop being such a puss. The howl pierced no less than 100 feet above us. My heart exploded in my chest as I flung myself against the embankment, grabbing at brush and rock. I couldn't hear the other two do the same, but this time, it just kept howling. I can't even describe the sound. It was like a wolf, but in pain, all mixed with a woman shrieking in fury. If I wasn't shaking before, I was then. And then it stopped. After what seemed like years, the noise just stopped. No footsteps or anything, just like someone cut the cord to the power. Silence. Kim was scared. Okay, yeah. I heard that. What was that? Something I really don't want to meet in the dark, Will stammered. We got up and brushed ourselves off. Since we're so hardcore, we don't take autometers. We normally have a pretty good feel for how far we've come. Kim spoke again, but in a whisper barely audible. I think we should leave. We aren't even halfway yet. We can make good time back down, I think. Will nodded. If we weren't already shaking, I'd call you Captain Obvious. You just did. We all grinned. Well, we tried to. We turned to head back down when we started hearing a new sound in the distance. It was hard to tell what it was, but steadily it became apparent. Drums. Don't those sound like... Will trailed off. Oh God. Are those voodoo drums? Kim had spent time in Africa, particularly in a tribe in Togo. If anyone was an expert on voodoo drums, it'd be her. Seriously, we're scared shitless and you have to tell us they're voodoo? Will was panicking. I could hear him pick up speed ahead of us. The drums got closer and louder and faster. It was almost as if they were mirroring his footsteps. As quietly as possible, I yelled out, Will, careful, man. There's a nasty part up ahead. And he didn't hear, didn't listen. He just went faster. Why is he such an idiot sometimes? Kim scoffed, and then we heard it again. Over the growling thunder of drums, that infernal howl from somewhere that did not belong in this world. But now, it was directly in front of us. It's in front of us. But how? There's only one way up and it never passed. She didn't have time to finish. A third sound ripped through the air, an inhuman squeal. Sounded almost like laughter, but then quickly turned into the most pleading, frightened, twitching sound imaginable, and it just kept going. I'm so creeped out, Kim breathed. I nodded. It was all I could do. I couldn't say anything. We continued to trot down the trail, feebly trying to ignore the drums behind us and the two screams ahead of us. And this is where I can't quite say everything. It's all jumbled. We happened upon a spot in God. It was everywhere. Blood organs, just the mess. I get so sick thinking about it. I couldn't stop crying. Poor Will. Poor Will. Kim vomited. The darkness just swirled. The screaming was him. He was the third scream. I couldn't think. I couldn't even breathe. I was paralyzed as I saw my friend, one of my best friends, just gone. The drums, oh God, the drums. Our headlamps flickered. Kim's went out. She just started screaming and hit her head. Those drums. I grabbed her hand and began pulling her. My light went out next. I grabbed Max. He led all the way while I suffocated in the darkness. I started coughing. The drums got louder until they consumed my thoughts. I almost thought I heard someone chanting something, but I had to focus on getting down. We reached the bottom and I shoved Kim into my car and jumped into the driver's seat. I popped on the lights and sat there for a moment. Kim was screaming at me over and over to just leave, but I was glued to the trailhead. Something was coming, something that killed Will. I have to see it. Even though we were in the car, I could hear the drums just as plain as when we were outside. Kim was sobbing hysterically, pleading with me to go, when the hellhound scream happened again right next to her window. And all I saw was a gaping blackness and teeth. Lots and lots of teeth. That did it. I floored the gas and sped back to the interstate. We just got back to my apartment, and we haven't spoken since we left the trail. I just had to write down what happened. I don't know what we'll do or what can be done. I don't know if I'll ever sleep again. My parents have always been needlessly strict. I'm sure you've heard of strict parents, but I can guarantee you've never met any like mine. They don't let me out of the house if one of them isn't with me, and I'm 17 for fuck's sake. I'm not allowed to stay with my friends or sleep anywhere other than my drafty little room in our old farmhouse. Speaking of the farmhouse, even though we live on a pretty sizable farm, I've never seen most of it. When I was a kid, it used to frustrate me terribly. Try telling a kid that they can't play outside, see what happens. As I got older, it made me wary. I thought my parents must be hiding something, or maybe they were just hiding me. Whatever their motivation, by the time I turned 15, I decided I'd had enough. Over the past few months, my relationship with my parents had been rocked with turbulence. We would argue over hours over privileges and rights in my non-existent social life. They didn't listen to me. They never listened. I was at the end of my rope, and I felt that I couldn't live in that house anymore, not as long as it felt like a cage. I decided to run away. It wasn't a terribly well thought out escape attempt, I must say. I only gave myself a week to plan exactly what I was going to do. In the end, I decided that I'd leave at night, taking the screen off my window and dropping it from the roof. It wasn't a very long drop, so I figured I could do with it without damaging myself. I'd have to stay off the road for a while. If someone saw me walking along the highway, I was liable to get caught. There was a long stretch of woods to the back of our property that I could seal myself in. I would walk through it and find the road on the other side, then hitchhike to, well, anywhere other than here. A few days before I planned to leave, I packed a backpack with a few changes of clothes, some water bottles, food, and a few toiletries. I didn't have any money, not allowed to have a job and no need for allowance, so I had to search around the house. I managed to find a wad of cash, a few $100 hidden in a shoebox under my parents' bed. They almost caught me at it too, but I managed to smuggle the money away in the bottom of my pack. By the time the night rolled around that Saturday, I was ready. My parents were fast asleep by midnight, unsuspecting of my brilliant and definitely foolproof plan, so that's when I made the move. The screen on the window turned out to be a little difficult to remove, but I managed to get it off after 15 minutes of frustration and cursing. I turned my bedroom light and crawled onto the roof, dropping down into the dewy grass below. I expelled the breath I'd been holding with the force of great relief. Freedom. Suddenly, a messy whirlwind of adrenaline surged through my system. I was stricken with the notion that at any second I could be caught and then I'd never have another chance. The fear did the opposite of paralyze me. It was a catalyst to force my legs into action as I sprinted towards the darkness of the forest. Once I was there, they wouldn't be able to find me. I was sure of it. I had to run for about 5 minutes, and I felt every second of it, the cold air burning my lungs as I imagined shouts and footsteps behind me. The second I set foot past the tree line, all my paranoia was eclipsed by pure, free joy. This was it. I was gone. There was no way they could find me. I could start a new life for myself. Yeah, I know. I wasn't particularly well informed about the way the world works. I suppose I'm still not, but I know enough now to realize that my plan would have failed sooner or later. Unfortunately for me, I was fated to fail much sooner than I would have liked. Since I was safe in the arms of the forest, I slowed to a walk, following the stars and the light of the moon to what I thought was a bright, fruitful future. It was a beautiful night, the air that had felt sharp before fading into a smooth, cold caress across my body. I could get used to this, I thought. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary at first. As I moved deeper into the forest, I began to realize that the trees were growing denser. That made sense, I guessed. It seemed that all I was doing that night was guessing. Still, I pressed forward, careful to avoid fallen branches and exposed tree roots. Thicker and thicker they grew. Finally, the going was too difficult. The trees were barely a foot apart, and I could barely squeeze through. I'll have to walk around this patch, I thought, turning back around. I was met with a wall of trees, no spaces between to even see the way back home. A lump formed in my throat as I stared at the trees that had certainly not been there before. At least, not that thick. Swallowing hard, I turned around, eyeing the slivers of the space between the trees in front of me. Better than nothing. I continued forward, climbing over roots and squeezing through tree trunks. The trees didn't get farther apart, but they didn't get close together either, so I thought I was probably okay. My foot snagged on a root and I fell to the ground, getting a face full of dirt and bark in the process. Swearing, I pulled up my foot, but it was stuck. I glanced back and my breath clutched at my throat, refusing to move in and out as it should. The offending root had snaked around my leg, squeezing me into a trap. I yanked at my foot, but the root just squeezed harder, so hard that the blinding pain whitened my vision and I let out a thin scream. Suddenly, I felt something slither around my wrist. I looked to see another tree root snaking up my arm, securing itself to my body. I was so focused on trying to free my hand that I didn't notice the roots creeping over me to my other hand and foot. Soon I was trapped in a maze of tree root, helpless even as I yanked and screamed. For a while, nothing else happened. I was spread eagle on the forest floor, my face still pressed into the dirt, my flesh smarting where the bark bit into it. Then they began to pull. The roots receded into the trees, pulling my arms and legs taut. My heart began to race as I was pulled past the point of comfort. My muscles stretched and pulled thin. Still it pulled until even I felt my shoulders dislocating and I gave it a ragged, wet scream. My mind flashed back to history class, something about drawing and quartering, something I'd been too disinterested in to read, and the stomach acid in the pit of my stomach gathered together in preparation of being hurled through the air in protest. The root stopped, leaving me stretched hot in excruciating pain, unable to lift my head from the floor to search my surroundings. And then it came. I heard the rustling of leaves behind me, definite footsteps this time. My breath hitched as those heavy steps approached me, and I could do nothing but wait for them. I strained my ears to listen as the footsteps stopped, then slowly started again, circling my body. It sounded like only 2 footsteps, but I couldn't be sure. Besides, it had to be an animal. Oh, God, what kind of animals lived in this forest, or even in this part of the state? I didn't know. I didn't know. It stopped in front of me, and I bit down on a shriek as I stared at the huge black hooves, splintered and bleeding, but powerful. I wanted to crane my head up to see more, but the roots were doing a pretty effective job of keeping me in place. The thing bent over. I could tell because I heard it fall to its arms over me, as though it were straddling me. It sniffed me, and I could just imagine its narrow black snout sniffing out the freshest blood in my body, and probably the urine in my pants from where the fear had bested me up. One of the arms lifted, and I felt a claw tracing along my back, scratching slight marks into my flesh. Shock began to enter my system as I started to shudder. I wondered in numb horror what it would feel like, being cored open by those claws. The back of my neck was suddenly wet and very, very hot, and I knew that it was salivating on me, in anticipation of its meal. I wouldn't be here to write this story if he hadn't arrived just then. I could tell from the footsteps charging towards us, the heavy grunts, that it was my father. The noise of his life was forever ingrained in my memory. I wondered if he'd brought a shotgun, because I was pretty fucking certain he was gonna need it. The beast in front and on top of me stiffened and let out a roar. It was wet, dripping with rage, and it had teeth of its own, ripping the night into shards of darkness. I saw its body tense as if to spring, but it never had the chance. There was a wet thud, and it staggered, moving from its position over me as it had been hit. I turned my head to the side, trying to see anything, really, but all I saw was something wet hitting the forest floor. Blood. It had to be blood, but oh god, whose was it? I realized it must have been the beast, because it moaned, a low, disoriented, pained kind of sound, and then began to stagger off. I was able to catch a glimpse of hairy, powerful legs and long arms with dagger-like claws scraping the ground before fear, pain, and shock pulled me into unconsciousness. I woke up in the hospital, being fed some story about a mugging that had left me bedridden. Yeah, right. I knew from the moment my doctor opened his mouth that nothing he could tell me would come close to the truth that the hooves and claws and hunger deep in its belly. Even in my drug state, I could sense the lies. My parents didn't punish me. I think they knew I'd been punished enough, having seen something and felt that I could never forget. They didn't seem angry, either, just scared. I realized for the first time that perhaps all those arguments weren't a product of their anger or control, but instead sprung from the very fear that I could see so clearly in their eyes now. When I thought back to my father, the way he had heard me in the night and come for me, I realized that they knew. They must have. In all those years of isolation and imprisonment, no protection. That made sense. So yes, I can say that my parents are strict, but I'll never use the word needlessly again. Nature can seem unrelentingly cruel at times, but it can be more compassionate than man. Like any living creature, the woods will give kindness in turn. Treat the forest with respect, and it will protect you. My grandfather always told me when I visited his rural farm, nestled in the slopes of the mountain. From the first day I stepped over the threshold of his ancient log cabin to the day I saw him alive, he would say, "Man is unpredictable and full of rage, but nature is steady and constant." I could understand his connection with the land, the trees living in such a remote location, sloping pastures of his property encircled by an endless sea of pines. I thought that was all there was to it. His faith and love of the woods came from a lifetime of living in close proximity, like that mutual understanding and acceptance born of a long marriage. But it was never that simple, as I learned when he told me the story of the family that had built and lived in the cabin 100 years before him, a story that locals to the area know well, I later discovered. I will recite it for you as I was told. The people who settled here were necessarily rough and lived difficult lives. Then the forest had been feared, dark and full of the unknown. For the man who dwelled in the cabin, life was a constant battle within the woods. He was at war with nature, for it threatened his livelihood. Yet his wife wandered there with no fear, for the forest provided only shelter to one whose true fear dwelt closer to the hearth. Her husband was a cruel man, frustrated by the difficulties of living in isolation on an unprofitable farm. He took his anger on his wife, who, on top of all his worldly frustrations, had as of yet failed to bear him a child. Now he thought himself cursed. He believed she had made herself a bear in spite to him and brutally punished her in accordance to his own sense of righteousness. In the dead of night, after he had beaten her, he would often slip out of the cabin and wander aimlessly into the woods, impervious to the mist seeping through her nightgown and the damp soil under her bare feet, and unconcerned by the screeches and rustlings of the night creatures. All seemed welcoming and warm compared to what she knew at home. Her husband, seeing that she loved the forest and that it offered her sanctuary in return, followed her one night. He found her sitting neatly in a clearing, slender hands folded gracefully on her lap, skin glowing white in the moonlight, watching him approach as though she had only been expecting his arrival. Her calm only fueled his own fury, and he went for her, looped her long, pale braid around her neck, and strangled her until all her life left her body. Disgusted by her, disgusted by what he felt she had forced him to do, he threw her down and left her there, laid out in the clearing, and fled. She laid there, undisturbed for many, many months, finally at one with the peaceful forest just as she had often dreamed. However, while the farm was isolated, it was not entirely excluded from society, and the nearby townsfolk grew suspicious at the absence of the men's wife. Learning of this growing discontent and worried what a search of the area may reveal, the man trekked back into the woods, seeking the corpse of his wife, intending to conceal it more effectively. In the clearing where she had perished, a pine had shot up at truly impossible speed. The tree had gathered the woman's skeleton and raised it into a clumsy attempt at human form. The spine was encompassed in the trunk, but the rib cage could yet be seen, protruding through the wood. Smooth, bleached white bone was juxtaposed against the rippled gray bark. The bones of her arms were lifted and extended in branches, fronds of pine needles exploding from her fingertips like fireworks. Her feet, it could be assumed, were beneath the soil, as the tree generously granted the woman access to the same nutrients and water it depended on. Her skull was firmly nestled between the crock of the two branches, held at the height the woman had stood in life, and tilted at an angle as though making a query of the world. Atop it was a circlet of climbing bramble, flowering white and perched like a crown. Astonished to see his wife thus resurrected, the man watched as dark red resin trickled from the hollow eye sockets in the skull like tears of blood. The villagers stumbled across the clearing with the single impossible pine tomb in the center days later. Its roots had grown above the surface in a way not natural to that species, constructing a cage of gnarled wood in which the corpse of the man rotted and was devoured. Trapped against the earth, the body was pressed and constricted into a twisted shape. As far as anyone could tell, the roots had first encircled his wrists, ankles, and neck, pinning him to the ground. After that, the order of events was impossible to discern. His clothes were torn, and underneath, the skin of his legs and stomach were welted and red like he had been whipped. Roots had burst through his chest and grew juttingly skywards, dirt and pieces of flesh still clinging to them. Others had forced their way down his throat, through his eyes and his nostrils. And still, watching over the base of the tree, the woman's skull rested, titled in eternal curiosity, while thick red resin ran over her forehead, trickled between her ribs, and dripped sluggishly from her bone fingertips. Seeing the woman had been raised by the forest, resurrected from death in the fresh embrace of the sapling, the villagers left the carcass of the man to rot and nurture the new pine. Justice had been carried out by the woods, and would continue to be served until the last nutrients of blood and marrow and bone dust had been consumed by the tree. My grandfather believed that the tree still grew in the forest somewhere, and had indeed searched it for himself. Perhaps, he speculated, the wood had finally tenderly grown over the woman's skeleton entirely, shielding her from the elements and prying eyes, allowing her a peaceful eternity of death in her living tomb. In his last letter to me, my grandfather wrote, "If you ever feel the righteousness is absent, take comfort in forces in this world beyond mankind. Should you ever need guidance or sanctuary when I have passed, seek out a pine in the center of a clearing that has grown taller than its fellows." We never found his body, but I hope he too found a place of rest and comfort in the woods he dearly loved.